Thanks, Brian. I just wanted to welcome you all back for our check-in meeting. I'm very excited to hear where you all are coming from, and I just wanted to let you know that even though Gay and Amanda are not with us on these sessions, I've been briefing them so they are aware of what's happening, and we're going to be getting ready for some follow-up activities after the Institute to work with you in your state. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick to start off this session. Rick?
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate it. And, for those of you who don't already know, Washington is being socked by snow, and a lot of people have been given the day off, but Jen Pirtle, like the U.S. mail, just keeps on delivering and stays with us from home. And, Jen, we really appreciate your stick-to-itiveness, as we do everybody's, by the way. We are slightly beyond what I guess we'd call the midpoint. So I'm calling this the midpoint check-in webinar today, and like the last webinar, we have just a couple brief objectives. And the first is to make sure that we get that brief check-in from the state. I had a really good opportunity to talk to all of you state facilitators here in the last yesterday, I guess, and was very impressed with the pace at which you're pulling things together. But, we have other folks on the phone today, and I look forward to getting an update that might sound a lot like the one we all heard yesterday for ourselves, but this way we have a broader audience, and that's really important that people hear what's happening in each state. So remember, I'll be doing that starting with California and going through alphabetical order here in just a minute. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the importance of communications. As you'll remember in your strategic plan, one of the focus areas from the ETA's grant application was the focus on making sure that a communication strategy was unfolded as part of your broader planning initiative. And we've got the benefit of our pilot SME states with us again today. Speaking of sticking with us, I want to again acknowledge their time and talent and dedication to the process. And I'm going to try to cobble together a lot of insights they gave me, but also use them as color commentaries to fill in the blank during that session of our webinar. So one, we'll check in with each other. Two, we'll talk about the importance of communications and maybe giving you some tips and strategies and tactics that work for some of our pilot states. So we'll start with this brief midpoint review from state report outs. We'll go to then this focus on communications, and then close today with a Q&A and a reminder of next steps before we leave and go forward from this webinar. So that's generally what we're here about and what we're intending to do. Let's go get started. First, just some housekeeping notes, if you will. At the midpoint, we'll say we're halfway home, and it's been impressive to me to see how people have hit the accelerator and really done an amazing job to start to pull things together and more, to get beyond the organizational phases now and have some really robust and important conversations in their states. Good energy, good commitment, good ideas, dare I say even some things bordering on improved innovation starting to happen from implementation states already. As we focus on the midway point, it's not too distant from now that we'll see that closing institute session. That is this coming Friday, the 13th. Remember that your presentations in your state templates are due close of business tomorrow, the 11th. You can send them to Fred Homan, and his email address is there, fhoman, H-O-M-A-N, @mayornet.com. By now, all of you have multiple emails from Fred. That should be easy. And if you would CC them to Susan Tartaglino, that would help us make sure that we've got everything in order. Remember, we're saying 3 to 5 slides. You may use more, you may use less. The important stat there is remember to keep it to 8 to 10 minutes in your updates. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Went it over with all the state facilitators yesterday. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll do our best to make sure we're supporting you there. And remember finally that the end of the Institute is really the end of the beginning. This activity obviously continues on through the submission of your plans January 13th of 2014 to ETA, and then our overall presentation of our state plans on the 16th of January. And for that matter, for many of you, we'll continue well beyond that date as well. And so there'll be more coming about how ETA tends to support you through the tape here and beyond. But just want to remind people of what's happening through the end of this week and then through the final presentations on the 16th of January. So with that much of a kind of reminder, let's dive right into a status update. Again, I'm going to ask folks to keep it simple and short. For state facilitators, same kind of thing we did the other day. My mission here is to make sure that we're staying tuned into you, and more importantly, that other states get a sense of where you are, what you're doing, and maybe have the benefit of things you're learning or bringing to the table. So that said, I've got a slide here that kind of has some open questions, but you guys know the drill by now. Let me turn to California. California, I don't know who's going to present for you today, if it's Ray, but whomever can just *6 to unmute your phone and give us a quick update on where you are.
Hello, this is Ray Bell, California.
Hi.
So basically, we are still at the same status that I reported out to you on Monday. We did have a new team member join us, and our team will be gathering tomorrow to work on our template for Friday. Awesome. And I still do not have the records from our assessments, so I'm working on obtaining those. And as of right now, we're just still having a little bit of challenges getting our team all together. But I'm starting to see the light with with some of our what was I going to say? We're getting there. We're picking up some pieces and trying to put the puzzle together. So there is some progress.
Yeah, and as we talked about in our call the other day, you guys are doing a remarkable job virtually, and now have your physical meetings starting to be put on a calendar where you're getting everybody together. In California, for the benefit of other states, they each did the assessment, but there's a new switch of facilitators there, so we're still getting that information collected and together. But you know, you have to look at things, everybody, based on where you came from, and the difference in the report out from a week ago to the one we had Monday was pretty stellar in California. And you know, I see the wheels starting to turn in earnest, and appreciate all the hard work you've done to get that team together and to start to share knowledge and get them prepared to meet the requirements of the deliverable, not only on Friday but beyond. And you know, we talked about on Monday, we have 2 planned calls on the 20th of December, I believe, and the 7th of January, if I'm not mistaken. We'll get them back to people, but we're going to stay with you through the next 30 days, and I think a lot of work is going to get done between now and January in California, and probably that's true in other states.
Absolutely.
As well. You know, so thanks a lot. Appreciate your checking in and sticking with it, and all the work you're doing to get up to speed, having been a late arrival yourself to the process. So appreciate that. Let's go over to Georgia.
Hey, this is Patrick from Georgia.
Hi, Pat.
Our status is, again, pretty much similar to yesterday's as well. We've had some internal communications issues this week, Monday and today, but it looks like they're getting them handled out. We're having an issue with email delivery and stuff, but we look to be on course to get everything to you guys Wednesday afternoon and then be prepared on Friday to present. So we're doing pretty well, and we're just getting everybody together and going through the Institute and really enjoying what we're seeing.
Well, Georgia, thanks for that. And just to, you know, to prompt folks, and you shouldn't be shy about reiterating some of what we talked about on Monday, guys, because not everybody on this call heard that, right? But in Georgia, I was impressed that you guys were, I think you were saying you were doing a lot of work virtually, but that you were meeting a couple times a week. You have set up a regular meeting schedule. I mean, the fact that you had pulled that together and had some regular form of communication and interaction was kind of really cool to me, and it starts to show that you're institutionalizing this process. So,
well, everybody on the team is really interested in what we can get out of it, and it's helping. It should help all of us get what we need done within the DOL. So hopefully the spur of this institute will be something that is pushed through the rest of the department, and hopefully that will happen quickly rather than late. So we're working hard to get everything together and put all the pieces that we're getting from the Institute together into what we're already working on through Scooby and Burning Glass. So it should be very, very interesting, and we're going to be adding more people on pretty quickly to get the rest of the information needed for the strategic plan.
Cool. And just again, for the benefit of the rest of the room, Georgia, as Patrick pointed out, has two existing initiatives, more than that,
we've got
two that he mentioned, right, in Scooby and Burning Glass being introduced to the IT area in Georgia, and Patrick reported that the exposure to the IWR and WIP started them thinking about how do all these dots connect, and that's broadened their horizons about who they should have at the table and how they should get people interested in this stuff. So I think that's happening in a lot of states, Patrick, and your example is, I don't think, unusual for other folks as well. So I just want to make sure we let other people kind of a little bit in under the hood of the things you're managing there. Appreciate your stamina and finding the opportunity in this, because it is a lot of work, but as we talked about on Monday, the fact that we're doing it at this frenetic pace and we're bringing everybody together is creating that, and I say this in a good way, that crisis that maybe enables people to get everybody's attention and put things on their radar, and that's connecting a lot of dots in a lot of states, so that's a good thing. Yep. All right, thanks, George. Appreciate it, Patrick. Let's move over to Illinois. I know we had somebody from Illinois who's talking.
Hi, Gideon's on.
Hi, Gideon. Hi.
I didn't want to step on Matt if he was going to speak up, but I'll go ahead. So 2 to 3 minutes. What is our current status? I think similar to other states, we've learned a lot in the first week, and particularly from coming together with each of the partners on the state team. And I'm going to admit something. I was when we were told to remain open through the process, I was a little skeptical. Like, wait a second, that doesn't sound like common practice for a grant. But I think it's been really wise because we have remained open-minded. We've been, testing out some of these concepts internally at our own agencies. We met prior to the Institute once last week. We're going to meet tomorrow again. As far as team member rosters, we've added the WIA administrator for the state.
Awesome. Good job.
Yeah. They bring a lot to the table. I've also got a lot of interest from our Chief Information Officer internally here at IDES with regards to the single sign-on. I do want to level set expectations because we do have a lot of sort of very high priority, high important IT projects that are already in the mix and coming online, but there's interest in looking at how this could fit into some of those projects, not as an additional project, but as an add-on to some of them. So that's kind of right. Assessment results, I think we've got those pretty much in. We may want to do an update with our new team member from WIA. And as far as what help requests, just, I think you guys have been great about pointing us towards, you know, the documentation on the website. Anything we can do to sort of quantify, for my purposes, the best case I can make always comes down to the bottom line. And so if we can sort of quantify on things like the integrated workforce registration, you know, estimates. I know it's hard to say because each state is different, but that's kind of going to that's probably going to be the biggest selling point is just kind of what kind of work time that'll take.
Yeah, I got that message. You've been asking that. You're big, open-minded and consistent, Gideon, right? Because you've been asking that question from the first time I saw your name on a screen, and you're still asking it. So I'm making a mental and a written note, and we'll see what we can do to, you know, I don't know that we have a silver bullet answer, but maybe we can come up with some kind of bigger than a breadbasket stuff that might help you make your pitch. And I'm not going to ask you now, but maybe in an email or something, I'd like to get some background on how you were able to get your chief information officer, how you got on his or her radar, you know, what messaging you used, whether you made a phone call, whether you sent a copy of the webinar, or, you know, I think a lot of states are going to try to fight through that and love to be able to build on your success. But congratulations! I mean, you're spinning your web and your network is growing, and that's a really good thing. So nice job, Illinois. And by the way, for the benefit of other states, and Gideon, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm talking to a lot of states lately. In Gideon's case in Illinois, there's a multiple agency initiative for a single sign-on like functionality among a very broad array of partners that was being led from the governor's level, and that included things like social services and, you know, a variety of different agencies. So that opens the door to the single sign-on, and at the same time it's a challenge because how do you break through when the governor already has an initiative? So I think Gideon probably is going to be a point in the future to help other states fight through those kinds of battles. But you're making headway, so kudos there. So let me go to Iowa. Do we have anybody online from Iowa today to update us?
Hi, this is Carrie.
Hi, Carrie. How are you?
Good. I don't think we probably have a lot of changes from Monday's updates. We still struggle with getting the whole team together. Even though we have meetings on the schedules, it seems like we struggle getting everybody to be there. So we do a lot of, you know, following up and downloading. It seems like after the fact. We are making really good headway on our social media side with all of the policy changes and things like that, getting feedback from our focus groups that we've been handling on as far as what customers want to see as well. So that piece is going very well. The single profile side will be a longer project, but we'll get there.
Well, that's cool. And I think that is a message that we heard in the chat yesterday, too, if you were on it. And Melissa's with us today, and she, I think, was the one that started. And so, by the way, is Muhammad. And I think they both, at one way or another, said, you know, this isn't a quick fix, and it's going to take time. And I think I sense, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but my sense is that people that came into this initiative thinking, you know, we're here for social media and not much more, have at least been exposed to the SSO and the IWR and the WIP and said, you know what, this is probably not something we can do this month, but it's something we need to focus on and figure out how to start planning for, because it is that potentially good, but it's not something we could take on this month. But now I could start engaging people, making the sale, figuring out how to get on the radar. And I'm hearing that from a lot of people, and if so, then maybe it finds that level of support in your strategic plans. All of you are, I know, trying to figure that stuff out now. And the other thing I want to acknowledge in Iowa is, you know, you're not the only state that's saying, you know, I'm having difficulty getting people together physically. In fact, I was in the car this morning, and there was a commercial, it must have been from one or another of webinar platforms, and the whole lead on the thing was, you know, it was a really tough time to get physically people together. They're busy, there's holidays, there's bad weather. All of that, by the way, applies today for us. And here we are doing an institute virtually. And kudos to all of you states, because even those of you who have not gotten together face-to-face as much as you'd like are A, doing a lot virtually, and B, now planning to get those face-to-face meetings together. So, I know it isn't easy, and I see the effort being made, and I, for one, really appreciate it. So thank you, Iowa. Thanks for that update. Let's move over to Kansas. Kansas, are you there?
This is Shelley Thompson.
Hi, Shelley.
Rick, I think you were reading my mind, because that's one of the things I was going to talk about. We've been actually joining the webinars as a group through our facilitator on Adobe Connect, which I think has been really helpful for us, because then we can chat with each other and make comments or come up with our questions together as a group. So I think that's been really helpful for us.
Cool.
We're going to meet tomorrow, or excuse me, Thursday. Then we did the assessment, and we kind of have our goals in line, but we want to kind of put them finalized before we get our PowerPoint together for you guys Thursday afternoon, and then we'll be presenting those on Friday. And then we also have a meeting set up next Wednesday with our facilitator and as a whole group to meet face-to-face, and it's actually going to be an all-day meeting. So we're excited.
There you go.
Yes, excited about that. And then one of our challenges, which you've probably heard us say more than once, has been our UI IT system, and we actually have a new UI IT director, and we have a meeting set up to visit with him about what we're trying to accomplish so that we can bring him up to speed and make sure that he's on board with everything. So
yeah, good. And again, I appreciate the fact that the rosters are shifting and they're moving, and that tells me that you guys are getting and you're understanding the fact that there's you don't integrate this system without having all the parties around the table and without having them at some senior levels, right? So sometimes that takes a little bit of cajoling, and sometimes it takes days or weeks or longer to do. But each of you seem to be chipping away at it, and you guys in Kansas are not the only ones that are. Some states are doing face-to-face meetings every 2 days, and others have done all virtual at regular intervals, but are planning face-to-faces more intensely, literally after the Institute, and moving into the kind of finalizing their plans in January. And whatever works and whatever you have to do, the fact that you're doing it is what's important here. And remember, we'll be staying with you, as ETA will, beyond Friday's end of the Institute. The Institute is the end of the beginning. It isn't the end. So, we'll be there to whatever extent we can be or need to be. We'll be there for you beyond Friday. So thanks, Kansas. And last but certainly not least, Kentucky.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you now.
Fabulous. I used to work for AT&T at one point in my life, so that Verizon tag just made me want to vomit. So Kentucky, which is how ironic that we're a K and we're the last ones. That's so funny.
Yeah.
So our team meetings, we meet at least once a week, if not after our webinars usually. Our team members and rosters is growing, as you indicated, Rick. We have everyone for the Department of Investment involved, and we have 2 of our workforce, our WIA folks involved as well. So
cool.
We have our big meeting, face-to-face meeting with everyone on the 19th to hammer out the rest of the strategic plan, or at least to get going on that process.
Right.
The only thing from my perspective going through this whole process is after we did the social media self-assessment, we're at the dipping our toes in phase, obviously. So a lot of the webinars and chats we've had is almost overwhelming from my perspective. When I'm listening to New York talk about, virtual career fairs with avatars. Like, I just want to be able to, like, tweet once a day. So I appreciate that we also circle back around and go, okay, how did you even get this whole process started by trying to get a, social media policy in place? So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, what we really need, we are literally starting from the ground up. The upside is, just like one of my fellow states said, it kind of takes, a fire or a immediate need to get things done in state government. So, obviously this is a very quick process, but I think it just expedited the people that needed to come to the table to have these conversations so that we can implement the process.
Yeah, and is that Holly speaking?
It is.
I figured it would be you, Holly. So, first off, you offer me an opportunity to leverage your comments. For those of you who have not had an opportunity to look at the social media guide online, it helps in that self-assessment of letting you know kind of where you are in the world of social media, and dipping your toes in the water is kind of this first step. And, of course, if you're a little bit further advanced, you're up to your knees, and then, you're totally dove in, or whatever the last two phases are, I don't recall. But it then gives you some ideas, no matter which phase you're in, right?
Right.
And so, I appreciate that. And one of the things I'm giving thought to on behalf of EPA, and I want to encourage all of you to share any ideas you might have, is how, not just between now and Friday, but beyond, or Friday and the 16th of January, but even beyond that, how can we help states help themselves, like-minded people starting in the same phase in the social media guide? How can we help foster collaboration and peer-to-peer engagement, and help, move you from, tweeting once a week to online career fairs, logically, and helping others? So, I'm very much interested in anybody's ideas in that regard. And, everybody, as I said at the start of this institute, Holly, everybody measures success based on where they start. There is no one set measure of success. Everybody takes a look at where they begin, they set a vision for where they want to be, and then they measure their success that way. And then they can keep stretching goals as they achieve them. So there's no shame in dipping your toes in. There's more than a few of us in that boat on this call, and a lot more like it around the country. So
and I think what the webinars has also given us ideas that we can hopefully build into our strategic plan.
Exactly. It gives you a sense of what the end game could be.
We're not going to have a virtual career fair. I get that. But, I think it's definitely something that's attainable in the future.
Exactly. And now you have something to shoot for.
What it also does is, not that social media hasn't been on our radar, but look, private sector, public sector, when funds get low, the first thing that gets cut is marketing. So, I think this just puts a focus that, at the end of the day, social media is not going away, whether we want it to or not. The only thing it's going to do is get bigger. So I think this just pushes us to get, like I said, all the people to the table that needs to be, and for us to have one common voice to get this done.
Good. And that is probably the most important first step. So congratulations, Holly. I know you guys are going to make it happen in Kentucky. You always do.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks to all of you. And I think it's important for states to hear from themselves and share what's happening in each state. And I have a sense that you guys have all hit the accelerator pedal here and moved things so much faster in the last week than any of you might have imagined you could have done even a week ago. And I certainly am noticing the effort and appreciate your time and talent in getting that done. So we spent more time on that update than we had, and yet it is the most valuable time we have. So I'm going to move quickly into our next session and try to move at a pace that both enables people to get something from it, but yet moves in a way that respects our time. I know some of you are geared up for yet another event shortly after this one is scheduled to end today. So let's move into a discussion of a communications plan. as part of your overall strategic plan. So what you know already is that it's kind of a requirement of the grant that as part of your strategic plan, you deal with the issue of communications. And that's a good thing that we focus on it, not only because it's a requirement of the grant, but importantly because it's a requirement for success. And it's probably a requirement for sustainability beyond the grant. So I'd like to just briefly explore some topics around the subject of communication strategies and planning, maybe offer you a quick framework that you can either use as presented or modify to make it work for you, and would help you in your planning. And more importantly than anything, maybe offer some of the ideas we got from our pilot states. We asked our pilot states to send us an information dump on what they did and what they think was important vis-a-vis their communication strategies and plans. And as you might imagine, we got enough content to write a small book, so it falls on me to kind of distill it down. And I'm going to try to present a compilation of what we learned from pilots, yet invite our pilot SMEs who are on the line to chime in as what I'm calling color commentators to kind of add some value and perspective to my telling of their story, if you will. And ultimately, the communication strategy, as I put it, you need to tell them your vision, your story. So what's the story going to be in Kentucky? What's the story going to be in Illinois or Georgia or Kansas or Iowa or California? Explain how it helps them. And that them might be your customers, your system, your staff, your leaders, the chief information officer in Illinois, whomever them may be. And you're answering these kinds of questions. You know, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? And effectively, you know, how does it affect me? How does it benefit me? So I've laid out this 4-step framework. It's very simplified. I mean, we could make it a lot more detailed and structured and complex, but I don't know that there's a need for it to be. Each of you have some experience with this. You may have a different model. You may want to add to this model, but here's the way I'm going to try to structure this story. And I call it a 4-step model for communications, and under that I say an engagement, because ultimately you're not communicating for the value of hearing yourself talk. The end game and the only reason to communicate is to engage others in your vision. So number one, therefore, you know, you communicate because you're trying to change behaviors. And by and large and overall, and in any research you'll see on the topic, the number one thing about changing behaviors is telling somebody an aspirational story. And it's not the technicality of your story or of your vision, it's the emotion of it. It's the inspiration or aspirational vision. Why is this important? How does it help my community? How does it build the strength of my state? How does it improve the lives of my staff, of my customers, of the employers I serve? And then first, so therefore, know your vision, know your story. Make it aspirational. Tell your audience what that story is and address it to their needs. So therefore, you need to know what their needs are. You need to know your audiences. Prepare your messaging once you do know your audiences to create understanding. And your messaging in this case, as we're going to learn, is not just about awareness building about what you're trying to do and why, but it's also about how to do it, and that means training. And then fourth, be bold enough to adjust. See what you've done, measure it against some metrics you've defined, and change and adjust as your measurements dictate. So if that 4-step model makes some sense as a framework, let's dive in quickly to each of the 4 steps just very quickly. First, in terms of your story, your vision, why, I encourage people to remember that your audiences run, and I call this vertical and horizontal integration, and that's just the way your messaging needs to flow. So across various agencies and organizations, and in many states, as you pointed out, your ES and WIA leadership is in different organizations entirely, different agencies within your state. So it's not just about departments within the labor agency, but it may be into commerce, it may be into a variety of different places, the Governor's Workforce Board and the like. And then the other one that I find critically important is boardroom to mailroom. Don't just communicate around your level and higher, communicate down to front line. Make everybody in your organization's boardroom to mailroom understand the story and understand their position in it and their role. Tell them, and you might consider things like this. I've seen very effectively a one-pager or FAQs. What are we doing? How does it affect me? Why are we doing it, and why now? We're so busy. We have so fewer resources than we used to have. Why another initiative? Ultimately, by the way, this initiative is not just about improving the customer experience. It's about extending the breadth and capacity of your existing resources. And so that's why now. Tell them how it affects and benefits them. And the last item here might have been the most important. If there's a way to allow folks to be involved at whatever level, tell them how to get involved. People that are involved are engaged at the level of owners. Owners don't resist the change. They embrace it and help you sell it. I say it all the time, make them stockholders and watch resistance melt away. So as you tell your story, consider telling people not only what you're doing and why, but give them an opportunity to be involved at whatever level you can. One of the states that sent us content for the session put it this way, pictorial on a slide, and it said, from this, the top image, to that, the bottom image. Now, some of you and those of us that skeptics might look at it and say, yeah, right, we're all singing Kumbaya, that bottom picture. Life isn't that way, and that's true enough. There will always be resistors and people pulling the other way on your road. Your job is to move the middle, is to make the masses, the most people in your agencies and organizations kind of buy in. And that ultimately is about engagement and communications of an aspirational vision. Why you're doing it, why it's important, how it benefits them, how they can get involved. So if that's the idea of telling an aspirational vision across all agencies, top to bottom, boardroom to mailroom, offering levels of engagement where possible, wherever possible, then the next step is knowing your audience. And we asked our pilot states, knowing your audience, what that meant to them. And this is a compilation of what we saw on both those folks involved in social media and those folks involved in the IWR and the WIP. And you can see that they're similar and not exactly the same. There may be some heavier involvement on one side and the other, but a couple things that are important. Everybody talked about your organizations, and of course it isn't just the workforce agency. There will be multiple agencies involved, state and local staff, and partner agencies too, business, and job seekers, and those involve not just UI claimants, but non-UI claimants, and also some targeted populations like vets and long-term unemployed folks. Now, I wanted to just call on a couple people here. In New York, Joanna, if you're there, you talked about it as 4 perspectives: agency, organizations, frontline, job seekers, business. And I'm curious about, you actually went to frontline staff and career centers, and you went to career centers in person. You didn't do this all online. Can you just address that and why you chose to do it that way?
Well, I personally didn't go to career centers in person. I wish I could have, but what we did do was we made sure that our career center managers were engaged throughout the whole process. We also made sure that our career center operators were engaged throughout the process, that our WIB directors knew about everything that we were doing. And then we did online surveys of our job seekers and our business, as well as in-person surveys at the Career Center. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to see if there was a difference about the needs and understanding our audience from the folks who interact with us solely online through self-service tools, and the folks who need to walk in and actually, see a Career Center staff person. So we wanted to really gauge across a large cross-section the different aspects of our audience.
And in Minnesota, Mike, thanks, Joanna. In Minnesota, you guys you're the one that mentioned partner organizations, Mike. What partners did you have in mind and why?
Well, we reached out specifically around our talent community initiative, but also brought more broadly on the social media topic to other community organizations. One was a economic development organization out of St. Cloud, Minnesota, and they developed a whole bunch of business requirements for what they were looking for in terms of creating a regional talent community. We also talked to people from the Itasca Project, which is a public-private partnership here in Minnesota, started more than 20 years ago by top CEOs rather in Minnesota. And then we also reached out to some of the WIBs who are on our team, and they brought in other partners that we could talk to just to get a more broader cross-section of ideas and information.
Yeah, I like the fact that you literally involved employers from your SWIB and made sure that you targeted them. Not a bad way to get engagement and involvement from state WIB and what you're trying to do, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me, Mike. Good. And then, you know, again, each state will look at the list of audiences that the pilot offered. You'll probably want to dig deeper and figure out in your state what that means, but, you know, you get the drift of it. And then you guys pilots gave us some great ideas in terms of tactics. So you could see they did a UI claimant survey, staff surveys. They did frontline support staff, both online and in person. You heard Joanna speak to that in New York. Idaho, 3 separate surveys, active UI claimants, randomly sampled businesses throughout the state, agency staff. I wanted to talk to you about that in Idaho. I mean, did you just do registered users businesses, or did you go to all the businesses in the state of Iowa and randomly sample them?
Well, we did state of Idaho. Not
Idaho, sorry.
I'm just kidding.
You know I keep doing, no, don't kid, I always do that. Go ahead.
We're the potato state.
Yeah.
So we did a sample base came from QCW because we wanted to make sure that we were sampling all businesses since we consider them all our customers. And then we looked at them by industry and also size of business so that we could see if there was a difference in their responses based on those categories.
Awesome. And I think that's important. I mean, sometimes we tend to get insular to go to those people that are registered with us. There's a whole world out there that we honestly haven't yet engaged with. So that was, I think, important for people to know. And then looking beyond that to the technology side of things, some of the tactics that we got from Mississippi and New York are included here. And Mississippi focused on the importance of face-to-face meetings, bringing IT and business people together in the same room, getting the technical people involved early, but that the process started with business people, and they did this by virtue of literally process improvement teams. And then, you know, looking at the beginning, and I was very interested, Mohammed, find a way to assess outcomes, see if features that you think will appeal to different audiences are actually being used. And you did that in face-to-face meetings, right?
Yes, face-to-face, and also a lot of things that we deployed or maybe have prototypes, you know, we wanted to evaluate and see if they will really be used or practical. Certain things we learned from our modernization experience when the IT teams actually did something on their own, and some things we did based on the user request. And end of the story here, when we deployed it, we found out that certain features were never used. It was simply asked because people had different perception of the system. When you actually use it, you get to the reality.
You know, and I think that ties in, and I don't know if Melissa's still with us and can speak to it, but be aware that, or Joanna, be aware of the different types of seekers and needs, balance between making information accessible and yet not overwhelming. Remember, ultimately, that this initiative is about integration of service delivery and reconnecting UI claimants to reemployment services. So having a capability that overwhelms people in terms of features may not benefit those hardest in need. The ones that are most in need probably just need enough to figure out, hey, you know what, I better get myself to a one-stop center. So I think that both in the case of New York here and in Mississippi, both are cautioning us, get to the user and understand there are different kinds of users, some of whom can't use much technology and only need enough to know that their prospects for reemployment depend on some intensive services and get them into a one-stop early. So the concept of understanding how to balance what you can do versus what your customer needs you to do is what came out loud and strong to me in these feature sets from our pilot states and what they offered us. And I wanted to make sure that I shared that with you guys today. And then this slide came from Idaho, and it kind of says what we just said. Who are we going to do? Survey. What are we going to ask them? And why? And it kind of switches us to our next step. Idaho's keen observation that the results of the survey really help us understand what to do in terms of tactics. And that leads us into preparing messages and understanding this is, New York, use the survey results, they tell us, to inform your communication strategy. And there's some examples that came from pilots that I think are really important, and this slide, again, came from Joanna in New York State. You can always tell Joanna-style slides because they have really cool pictures on them with stats like 58%. But in this case, the message she's sending us that the survey results inform them of the critical need for staff training. And they developed as part of their communication strategy, not just the outbound messaging you think of, but a training strategy. So they found out, for instance, that 58% of the respondents of 693 frontline staff and career centers needed specifically additional training on social media before they can even think about deploying anything. And in the case of New York, Joanna, I think you said you did a virtual summit. What did that sound and look like?
Basically, what the virtual summit was a webinar-based conference where we focused on one social media tool per week and then talked about how those tools are used by workforce professionals, used by job seekers, and used by business customers. So this way we weren't completely overwhelming them, but really it was about communicating the value and the importance of each of these tools for reemployment strategies for our customers. So it was a little bit of education, a little bit of training, and a lot of marketing and communication.
Yeah, and that's the message that I'm trying to get out to people today. Your communication strategy is just not about telling the outside world what you're doing. It's boardroom to mailroom, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how to do it. And I love that idea of that. Pick a topic every month, whether it's a lunch and learn or it's a virtual session or somehow or another, break it down to a point where you can get frontline staff engaged and feeling comfortable to make it more interesting for them and more effective for your job seekers. In another of the slides that were shared with us from New York, another interesting result that impacts on the communication tactics that you might employ. As they did a survey of customers, they asked this question: would you be interested in attending trainings on social media for job search? 55% yes, said yes. But critically important, the survey itself, and Joanna, this was an interesting stat, the survey itself had the effect of driving up participation in social media trainings for job seekers in their workshops. So just by virtue of asking people the question, they saw an increase in the uptake of job seekers coming to workshops about how to use social media in the job finding and the job search process. And another result out of New York that I thought was interesting, and Joanne, I'll be interested in your take on this. When they asked job seekers, 55% of them said, yeah, we know how to use social media in our job search, but only 34% actually had a LinkedIn account. So, Joanna, what does that tell you, and did that shy you away from LinkedIn, or did that just tell you that you had more work to do to get your job seekers ready to use it?
It told us that we had some more work to do, and we actually found this happening not only with the job seekers, but also with the staff a self-assessment as well. You know, people don't know what they don't know if they don't know it, and so definitely getting a baseline of knowledge or kind of understanding at least what they think is pretty helpful, because then you know if you're going to have a communications issue about relaying the value and the importance, or if they already understand that. So we knew from the survey that while they did know that social media may be important, they didn't really know the tools in order to be able to use it and leverage it as well as they should.
You know, and I note also that you guys have 1,652 respondents to date from your surveys, and you're continuing to refine them and continuing to do them. So they're not on a one-time event, and the communication strategy needs to be sustainable, and the survey sustainable. Also, another interesting stat that came out of that from New York, 64% of people said they have a smartphone or tablet. And that tells you, and Idaho made this point to us as well, they needed to figure out how to make things mobile enabled, because they found out that their customers were actually more mobile than maybe we might have thought. Another good stat, this one also out of New York, 55% of our businesses would welcome a virtual job fair, and 75% of our customers would welcome virtual services. So, you know, we were just talking about Kentucky dipping their toes in, and they're probably not ready for a job fair yet. It'd be very interesting to see what the survey says in Kentucky about whether their customers are or not. And then, by the way, that's not directed at Kentucky. It could be any of us. And I think I heard from some folks, and I know it's true with many states, this might vary by region. There may be more rural areas where folks don't yet know what a LinkedIn is, and yet in more metropolitan areas they expect us to be in LinkedIn and wonder why we're not already there, as an example. So the survey results dictate, if you will, your tactics. Idaho, another thing I wanted to come back to you, Darlene. I love some of the things you learned from your business audience. And I love the second one. Our greatest opportunity was with businesses of 0 to 99 employers. Obviously, that stat tells me something about how to implement a communication strategy. How did you conclude that? And how do you know that 0 to 99 employees is the size that opens the best door for you in Idaho?
Well, I would say that most businesses in Idaho are small businesses to start with, but also those are the businesses who probably don't already have, you know, social media plans and social media coordinators and that type of thing. Those are the ones who probably need our help the most.
Makes sense. And again, in each state, I think there's similar learnings that we had from these surveys, and that they are going to wind up determining your communication strategy. Here's Idaho's job seeker slide. I'll note the second bullet here too. Look at this. Learn our customer believes the biggest differentiator for the workforce system in Idaho. No spam, like they get on Craigslist. No support, which is that they don't get from Monster and Career Builder. And this starts to build out a potential story. This becomes a differentiator that ultimately drives probably some of your thinking in your communication strategy. And I'm going to end this section with this. We're dumping a lot of information. I'm going to make these slides and obviously this recording available to all. But Idaho, you did a good job here in this brand slide. And I know some of you are doing similar things. I was engaged briefly in an unrelated project where a brand strategy really well done in Kentucky. And I'm sure some other states are doing that. But Idaho here, you know, yesterday in our chat, people asked about the idea of a common voice. And I think that question may have come from Georgia, if I'm remembering correctly. And Darlene, this is a great slide. Why don't you just explain it briefly? To me, it seems like you kind of captured the essence of your communication strategy and your brand strategy at the top of this, and then started to translate that into what it becomes for various targeted audiences. And it varies slightly, doesn't it, between talking to business, job seekers, and targeted audiences like you. Can you just explain this slide really quickly to our group?
Sure. So we did a branding guideline document that goes further than just social media. And so in there we talked about, we have specific colors we use, depending whether you're talking to business, job seekers, students, youth, to make it easily recognizable. And also the messaging, like you said, is slightly different. And it's for social media, but it's also for any of our marketing, flyers, that type of thing. So this brand document is available for everyone who works for the DOL. And we want to make sure that people understand what our voice is, what our message is, and that we're communicating this with all staff so that people understand what our goals are.
Yep. So, it describes the kind of voice you want people to speak in when they're interacting with social media. It describes the kind of messaging that you want them to take to business, to job seekers to use. And I would encourage this for folks to think about, and again, recognize you don't have to build this out by Friday or even by the 16th, but determine that you're going to figure out how you're going to manage your voice, how you're going to manage your best messaging, what that critical messaging is going to be for your state, and a tool like what you see here helps you communicate that boardroom to mailroom across agencies and partners, inside your own agency, and for that matter outside, as Mike spoke of in Minnesota, and align people to what you've learned. So your survey gets you the results. This kind of a comprehensive one-pager starts to reflect it in ways that people can understand it. For folks on the phone, there may be other targeted audiences you want to focus on. Could be vets, could be long-term unemployed. The messaging might change slightly, but it still has to reflect that common brand, the active voice, and the other things that you decide at the front end. So again, survey results dictate tactics and to some degree messaging, and that puts you in a position, therefore, to put your plan in place, decide what your metrics for each audience are. Are you going to measure likes? I'm very interested when I talk to folks. Joanna's very quick about telling me how many likes she got last month on Facebook, for instance, in New York. And I know, Joanna, you do a lot of tracking of things like that. For each state, it may be different. I just want to really encourage you. Remember to find out how you've got to measure what you do. Remember, every victory, small ones, particularly at the front end, become promotable and part of your communication strategy. And ultimately, being able to measure, reflecting ROI is what's going to bring sustainability not only in your state, but to help people like Jen Pirtle and Gay and Amanda drive sustainable, ongoing technical assistance and support from the federal level and beyond. So key elements to focus on here as we close today involve sharing your vision and building engagement in your communications plan. Start with a clear understanding of your audience and audiences, and I've given you a sense of what our pilot states have concluded those audiences are. Support your brand and value proposition, but what you learn from knowing your audience, and help that to detail your strategies, tactics, who's going to do what by when as elements of your strategic plan, and ultimately and importantly, determine how you're going to measure what you do, whether that's having a Facebook page up by Q1, getting to 1,000 likes by mid-year, whatever it is that defines success for you, holding your first job fair by a certain date. Try to make sure that those measurements are articulated and built into your plan so that we can demonstrate your successes and you can do so within your own organizations. So those are the kinds of messages that I thought were important, and in a compilation of what we've learned from talking to our pilot states. Obviously, each of them are available and will continue to be to answer any questions you have. I don't see questions that are coming in at this time from states, but if there are any, please feel free to chime in now with them. I see we're running along a little bit long here, so I'm going to look to close out today's session because I know a lot of you are going to run to do a break or answer an email prior to our 3:30 chat on technology tools. But Damon from Georgia is asking a question, And at the risk of running a minute or two longer, let me just kind of put that out there to the SME panel that we've got assembled. So Damon's asking from Georgia, how did you conduct the surveys? The first thing I want to say is, remember in the social media guide on the RC website, there's a whole section about surveys and conducting surveys. So I would refer people there. But I'm just going to go really quickly around the room. We've heard this in different places before, but I think a lot of you did online. I know some of you did face-to-face. I know in the case of technology tools in Mississippi, there were more or less work groups, quality improvement teams, process improvement teams, where you got together face-to-face. But let me just run around the room real quick. I'll go backwards from Darlene and move east. So how did you do your surveys real quick, Darlene?
So the staff one, we use SurveyMonkey, which is a survey tool, and sent out an email asking people to go to that survey and answer it. And then the business and job seekers, those were all done by phone.
Telephone surveys?
Yeah,
you hired a contractor?
We hired a couple of temps to do those for us.
Oh, cool. Good idea. All right. So you guys designed the survey, and then you just hired temps in, and they got on the phone and just hit it for you.
In-house experts.
We had some in-house experts, including Sarah here, who has done surveys in the past, so I think that helped us out.
That's really good information. Thanks, guys. Let me jump over to you, Mike.
For our job seeker survey, it was via paper at REA sessions. For the staff and the employer surveys, we did them online electronically.
Like using a tool like SurveyMonkey?
Right.
Okay, great. New York, Joanna, I know you've talked to this a couple times, but one more time, just fill out this blank for us.
Sure, we did a mix of both. We had a paper-based survey that was piloted in about 5 career centers, suburban, urban, and rural. And the way that they put together the results varied on the center. Some had temp staff hand count the surveys. Other had interns count the survey results. And then others just had the social media community, a practice person responsible for counting the survey results and then sending them back in to us. And we also had online surveys available through SurveyMonkey, where in the Career Centers, customers could use the URL link in the Career Center if they wanted to do that. And then also we put it on our website off of our Jobs Express, which is our governor's job bank link right there off of that website. So we had about 3 different methods.
Awesome. Anybody else want to chime in? I think, Mississippi, your work was pretty much done in focus groups, the technology tools work. So I don't know if that question applies to you, but am I wrong, Mohammed?
Oh, we are doing it.
So we also used the monkey survey in the past, and we actually, I don't know about doing any surveys in Mississippi as such.
Well, let me just make a statement for the benefit of the implementation state. I believe we've already gotten the support of the pilot states in sending us copies of surveys they've used and survey results. And I won't put them all on the spot today, but I believe they've already shared that. And I think Pat Auerbach has been very helpful to us there. But let me do some follow-up internally and see if I can get resources like copies of surveys and things so you guys don't have to reinvent the wheel. It may already even be on the RC website, so you could check there. But I'll do some homework and follow up with folks on what resources we have available to you beyond those in the social media guide on surveys. But that's, Damien, I hope that's a help in terms of a follow-up to your question. And Gideon is saying, very specific topic on your website, did you find this page helpful? Google survey will set up for free. Yeah, so Gideon from Illinois, he's got a 1-question survey that he's doing on his website, and you can get Google survey to set it up for you. And I'm getting a message, as you all are, from Pat. Jen Pirtle is putting the audience survey information on the RC website up in the chat room. Brian Keating has offered the link to the social media example, so while I've been listening and chatting, these guys have been doing some online research, and I appreciate it. And Pat Auerbach, I really appreciate your offer to help, and we will connect, and we'll send some communication out to all the state facilitators on some of these assets in a compilation. Fair enough? So we're now 10 minutes long on a day when we've got everybody running. So that's my bad. I'll apologize to all of you for it. But that additional few minutes, I think, was really helpful to state. So appreciate everybody's involvement. You, SMEs, particularly, thank you for sharing your knowledge. I hope I did it justice in a quick recap today. I'm going to ask those folks who can to stay on the line as Brian links us to the online feedback questions. And then I'm going to say have a wonderful balance of the day. Don't forget to join the Technology Tool chat at 3:30 Eastern, coming up here in just a few minutes. That one focused on how to use the ITSE technical documentation to shorten your learning curve and make integration of the technology tools happier time for all of you in the implementation state. Thanks to ETA, thanks to our SMEs, thanks to all of you in all the states for being with us. We'll talk to you again soon, and see you at 3:30. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much. Bye now.